Ladies and gentlemen, let's dive into something that may seem a bit unusual at first, but I promise it's going to be worth the ride. You know, sometimes history has this funny habit of repeating itself, almost like that one friend who insists on telling the same joke every time you meet. And yet somehow it gets funnier, or at least more curious, every single time. Now think about leaders. Yes, those folks who stand on stage, wave at cameras, shake hands, and occasionally try to look like they're not wondering what they're actually supposed to be doing. Leaders are supposed to have a moral compass, right? They're supposed to steer the ship, make tough calls, and keep us all from running into metaphorical icebergs. But here's the kicker. History shows us that sometimes those moral compasses have a weird sense of humor themselves, and they don't always point north. Picture this. There's this leader, let's call him Ed the guy in charge. He starts his political journey with a set of principles, clear as day. He wants to do good. He wants to stand for justice. He wants to make sure the nation is running smoothly and the streets are metaphorically paved with gold, or at least not potholes. Now, early on, everyone notices. They nod approvingly, they clap politely, they probably post a few encouraging hashtags on social media. Things are good. People believe in him because he believes in something bigger than just himself. It's inspiring, and who doesn't like a little inspiration? Even if it's just the kind that makes you smile while you're stuck in traffic. But then something interesting happens. The guy in charge begins to shift. Now, let's not talk about anything dramatic here. There's no need for any scandals or dark plots. Let's just say that as time passes, the decisions he makes start to look a little different from what he promised. Maybe the moral compass starts spinning like a carnival ride. Maybe the clear north he swore by turns out to be slightly northeast or southwest, depending on who you ask. And suddenly people are scratching their heads. They remember that initial promise and wonder what happened. It's almost like buying a chocolate bar that says extra creamy on the wrapper, only to bite in and find out it's slightly bitter and suspiciously crunchy. Not catastrophic, but definitely puzzling. Here's the funny thing. History seems to love doing this. There's this fascinating pattern, almost like a cosmic joke, where leaders start off strong, inspired, and full of promise, only to drift ever so slightly into a kind of moral gray area. It's not like they suddenly become villains in a movie with dramatic music and lightning strikes. No, it's more subtle than that. It's the little things. Compromises here, decisions there, policies that seem reasonable at the time, but when you step back and look at them through the lens of history, they echo patterns we've seen before. And the echo isn't subtle. It's like a friend who keeps repeating the same story at every dinner party until you start noticing all the little details you didn't catch the first 10 times. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Are you telling me leaders are predictable? Well, in a way, yes, and not just in the boring, obvious way. It's the kind of predictability that's fascinating because it blends human nature with history. Leaders, just like the rest of us, are prone to distraction, to changing priorities, to being influenced by a mix of public opinion, personal ambition, and that weird little voice in the back of their head that keeps saying, oh, what if? And the thing about history is that it doesn't judge. It just quietly observes, like that neighbor who never waves but always remembers exactly which day you planted your tulip. So, when we look at the journey of this particular leader, we see the beginning of something promising, a dedication to principle and a desire to guide the nation with integrity. People cheered because it was refreshing, almost like finally finding a clean spoon in a kitchen full of dirty ones. It felt good. It felt right. And the comparison that history whispers to us is almost too perfect to ignore. The pattern mirrors something we've seen long ago with leaders who seemed to start on the right track but gradually began to veer, not dramatically, not in a way that shocks, but enough that it becomes noticeable, enough that historians 100 years later might squint and say, interesting choice there. And isn't that the irony? That in politics, as in life, the very qualities that make someone promising at the start, flexibility, willingness to compromise, desire to appeal to others, can sometimes set the stage for a subtle drift away from the initial moral clarity. It's not necessarily bad, it's not necessarily evil, but it's human. And when you see it mirrored in history, it's like the universe winking at us saying, pay attention. Patterns matter. Because if we're honest, we're all susceptible to that drift. We all start with grand plans to eat healthier, exercise more, be kinder, and then life happens. And suddenly we're eating cake for breakfast and sending passive-aggressive texts to the neighbor about the garden gnome. Leaders are humans, history is human, and patterns are just the universe's way of keeping us on our toes. Now let's add a touch of humor here. Imagine standing in a room filled with advisors, each nodding gravely as the leader announces a decision. The advisors whisper, "I remember what you promised." And the leader scratches his head and replies, "Yes, but also, what if we try this instead?" It's a scene we've seen over and over. It's like a sitcom, except the stakes are national instead of just who has to do the dishes. And history chuckles quietly in the corner, taking notes, not because it wants to mock, but because it knows that these human patterns are fascinating, amusing, and educational all at once. So, when we consider the journey of this leader from the start of his career, full of principles and clear intentions, to the gradual, subtle shifts that follow, it's not merely a political story, it's a human story. It's a reflection on the nature of promise, the temptation of compromise, and the delicate balance between doing what feels right in the moment and holding fast to a guiding moral compass. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us to pay attention to patterns, to notice the small shifts, to understand that even leaders, who may seem larger than life, are still navigating the same currents of human complexity as the rest of us. History teaches with a gentle sense of humor that every leader is part of a larger narrative, a narrative that stretches back centuries. And when we study the patterns, when we recognize the echoes from the past, we gain insight not just into the leaders themselves, but into ourselves, into our society, and into the subtle forces that shape the decisions we make as a collective. It's a little like looking at a mirror and noticing that your hairline is creeping up slowly over the years. You didn't see it at first, but step back and, there it is, the unmistakable trend. The same goes for leaders in history. Patterns emerge and they're instructive, enlightening, and sometimes a little bit funny. In the end, the lesson is simple but powerful. Observe the beginning, pay attention to the shifts, and understand that morality, like a compass, is delicate. It can be influenced, redirected, and subtly turned, not by malicious intent, but by the ordinary pressures of life, the unexpected circumstances, and the complicated web of decisions that every leader must navigate. And just as the early promise of a leader can inspire, so too can the recognition of these patterns serve as a guide for us, as citizens, as individuals, as participants in the ongoing story of our nation. History, as always, whispers its lessons quietly, often with a wry smile. And if we listen closely, if we observe carefully, we might just understand not only the journey of a leader, but also the timeless truths about human nature, responsibility, and the importance of holding fast to principles, even as the winds of circumstance blow from every direction. And so, as we reflect on the path of leaders past and present, let us remember that moral clarity, though sometimes elusive, is a compass worth following. Because even the subtlest shift can echo through the annals of history, teaching us, entertaining us, and reminding us that in the grand theater of human affairs, patterns, promises, and principles matter more than we often realize. Now let's move on to something that's... Yes, prophesy. The kind that makes people scratch their heads, raise their eyebrows, and occasionally wonder if someone has been sneaking extra cups of coffee before writing their books. You see, there's a certain fascination with the idea that current events, political decisions, and even the little everyday quirks of life might not just be random, but might somehow echo patterns we've seen before, patterns that stretch back centuries. And when you start thinking about it in that way, suddenly the world becomes a lot more interesting, like noticing that your cat has been secretly judging your life choices the entire time you thought you were watching TV alone. Let's talk about leaders for a moment, because that's where prophecy gets really, really fun. Leaders stand on stages, make speeches, shake hands, and nod solemnly at reports, but here's the twist. What if there's more going on than meets the eye? What if the decisions they make aren't just influenced by politics, polls, or public opinion, but also by a kind of invisible current that flows through history, nudging events along in ways that are both subtle and astonishing? It's like watching someone try to juggle three oranges while riding a unicycle and then realizing there's a fourth invisible orange that's somehow influencing the whole performance. That's prophecy for you. Invisible, influential, and maybe a little bit ridiculous, but in the most intriguing way possible. Now, I know some people hear the word prophecy and immediately think of dramatic visions, dark clouds, or someone shouting cryptic warnings in the streets. But the type I'm talking about isn't that dramatic. It's subtle. It's quiet. It's like noticing that every time a particular leader makes a speech about unity, there's a tiny pattern of similar speeches stretching back hundreds of years, almost like history itself is whispering. Pay attention. There's a rhythm here. And the rhythm is fascinating because it's not just a coincidence, it's a pattern that repeats almost like a cosmic playlist on shuffle, but every so often it hits the same song, and we're lucky enough to catch it playing again. Prophecy in this sense acts like a lens, a way to look at events and notice things that might otherwise escape our attention. Take, for instance, the way leaders announce initiatives, sign documents, or even make certain gestures in public. On the surface, it might seem ordinary. People might nod, take notes, or tweet about it with hashtags like #leadership_goals. But when you start looking at these actions through the lens of history and prophecy, suddenly patterns emerge. These aren't necessarily predictions of doom or gloom. No, it's more like noticing that your morning coffee routine always leads to the exact same traffic jam, and then realizing that there's a bigger, almost magical pattern in play. Subtle, surprising, and a little bit amusing. And here's where it gets even more fun. Because prophecy isn't just about predicting things. It's about interpretation. It's about looking at the seemingly mundane decisions and events and asking, why does this matter? What does it echo from the past? Imagine for a moment that every speech, every policy, every handshake, and every nod is like a note in a grand symphony. At first it sounds like a bunch of noise, like an orchestra tuning before a performance. But if you listen carefully, patterns start to emerge. Harmonies you didn't notice at first, motifs that repeat, themes that seem eerily familiar. That's the beauty of prophecy. It turns ordinary events into a story with depth, meaning, and a little bit of cosmic humor. Let's not forget, prophecy has a knack for being dramatic without being violent or scary. It's dramatic in a subtle, oh, wait a minute, did that just happen kind of way. For example, a leader might make a decision that seems small, like signing a minor piece of legislation or attending a particular event. On its own, it might seem trivial, like finding a sock behind the couch that you thought you lost forever. But viewed through the prophetic lens, suddenly that little that little decision takes on significance. It echoes patterns, reminds us of history, and even teaches us lessons about leadership, responsibility, and the sometimes funny ways in which events align. And it's not just about patterns that are obvious. Prophecy loves subtlety. It's like a magician who doesn't just pull a rabbit out of a hat, but first distracts you with 10 other things so that when the rabbit appears, you're simultaneously amazed and slightly annoyed that you didn't see it coming. Every event, every gesture, every announcement can carry meaning if you know how to look for it. And when leaders interact with their advisors, sign papers, or even make seemingly small decisions, prophecy suggests that there might be echoes of long past moments, like shadows cast by history itself. It's fascinating, it's amusing, and yes, it's a little bit mind-boggling if you let it be. Here's something funny to consider. Sometimes prophecy is like a cosmic whisper that says, "You think this is new? Oh no, my friend. We've been here before." It's like realizing that the same leadership challenges, the same moral dilemmas, and the same unexpected twists have already happened countless times, only in slightly different packaging. History loves recycling itself, but it does so with a subtle sense of humor, almost like it's winking at us while keeping a straight face. And prophecy is the lens that allows us to catch that wink, to notice the pattern, and to reflect on the deeper lessons at play. And let's be honest, looking at events through a prophetic lens can be downright entertaining. It's like playing a giant game of connect the dots, except the dots are speeches, policy decisions, public gestures, and historical parallels. You start connecting them, and suddenly a picture emerges that's bigger than any single dot. And while some might scoff and say, "Oh, it's just coincidence," Those who pay attention see the subtle rhythm, the recurring motifs, and maybe even a cosmic joke or two along the way. It's a perspective that brings history to life, adds a sense of humor to otherwise mundane events, and reminds us that life and leadership are rarely as random as they seem. So, as we consider the prophetic insights, it's worth thinking about what they tell us beyond politics. They remind us that there's always more than meets the eye, that patterns matter, that history has lessons for us, and that sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about the way events unfold. It's a reminder that leadership is complex, that decisions resonate far beyond the moment, and that paying attention, listening carefully, and noticing subtle patterns can be both enlightening and oddly amusing. And here's the final twist. Prophecy isn't just about looking backward or forward. It's about being awake in the present. It's about noticing the little things, the repeated motifs, the echoes from history that appear in the most unexpected places. It's like watching a comedian tell the same joke in a slightly different way every time, and suddenly realizing that the joke is actually a lesson in disguise. It's about seeing the invisible threads that connect events, decisions, and actions, and recognizing that there's meaning, humor, and wisdom woven into the patterns if we choose to see them. And so, as we reflect on the prophetic dimension of leadership, let us remember to pay attention, to notice the echoes, to laugh at the subtle humor, and to marvel at the patterns that history reveals. Because when we do, we gain insight not just into leaders, but into life itself, into the way decisions ripple across time, and into the gentle, often funny ways that the universe reminds us to pay attention, think carefully, and appreciate the fascinating dance of events unfolding before us. And here's the closing line for impact. If we open our eyes, listen carefully, and embrace the subtle humor in history's patterns, we may just find guidance, insight, and a little joy in the unfolding story of our world. Now let's consider something that's always struck me as both profound and a little bit amusing. Yes, reflection. Not the kind you see when you realize your hair has a mind of its own in the mirror, although that's a kind of reflection too, the kind that asks us to pause, look at our choices, and really think about what our actions mean. And when I say reflection, I don't mean the dramatic, long-suffering kind you see in movies where someone stares pensively out a rainy window, sighing deeply. I mean the practical, sometimes humorous, often enlightening kind that helps us understand not just what is happening, but why it's happening, and perhaps even what it might teach us. You see, reflection is a bit like having a conversation with yourself, except it's slightly more polite. It doesn't interrupt with a sarcastic comment about that extra slice of pie you ate last night. Instead, it nudges gently, like a friend who says, "Hey, maybe think about that decision before you make it." And that's exactly what we need, especially when we're looking at leadership, history, and the way events ripple through time. Leaders make choices every day, some big, some small, but each one carries weight. Reflection allows us to step back, notice those choices, and consider the broader implications, all while keeping a little sense of humor intact. Think about it this way. Every decision, every policy, every handshake, every nod in a crowded room is like a pebble tossed into a pond. The ripples spread far and wide, touching corners you might never see. Now, some of those ripples are subtle, like when you accidentally knock over a cup of coffee and manage to spill only half of it, leaving the other half heroically intact. But other ripples are more obvious, and they catch our attention in ways that make us pause and think. Reflection is the tool that allows us to notice those ripples, to consider their patterns, and to understand their significance without necessarily turning everything into a doom and gloom story. Here's where it gets particularly interesting and a little bit funny. Reflection also allows us to notice irony, which, let's be honest, life is full of. Think about it. A leader might make a decision intending one outcome, but history has a way of twisting things just slightly, enough that the result is different, often in amusing ways. It's like setting out to bake a cake and ending up with something that looks like a lopsided science experiment, but hey, it still tastes good, and it teaches you something. Reflection lets us step back, chuckle a little, and learn from these twists. It teaches patience, understanding, and the importance of keeping perspective, especially when it comes to complex choices and unpredictable results. And the beauty of reflection is that it's not reserved for philosophers or scholars. Anyone can do it, and when it comes to observing leadership, it becomes a powerful tool. By reflecting on the actions of those in charge, we start to notice patterns that might otherwise escape our attention. We see recurring themes, repeated gestures, and decisions that echo past events in ways that are both instructive and entertaining. It's like finding a familiar melody hidden in a new song. You can appreciate it on multiple levels, and it adds depth and richness to the experience. Now, I must admit, reflection can also be funny because it often exposes contradictions in the most subtle ways. A leader might say one thing early on in their career, and then years later, do something that seems at odds with that original statement. On the surface, it might make us raise an eyebrow or whisper, "Really?" But when we approach it with reflection, with a sense of humor, it becomes less about judgment and more about understanding human nature. We begin to see that flexibility, compromise, and even contradiction are part of life, part of leadership, and part of the ongoing dance between intention and outcome. Here's another amusing aspect of reflection. It often teaches us lessons indirectly. It's not always about immediate clarity. Sometimes it's like reading a book that seems confusing at first, only to realize later that every chapter was setting up a perfectly logical, albeit slightly ironic conclusion. We might look at a leader's actions and think, "Oh, wait, how did we get here?" And then a little reflection reveals the path, complete with its twists, turns, and the occasional aha moment that makes us smile. That smile is important because reflection without a sense of humor is like trying to eat spaghetti with a fork that has a broken prong. Technically possible, but unnecessarily frustrating. Reflection also encourages us to consider not just individual actions, but the larger patterns they form. Every speech, decision, and public gesture contributes to a bigger picture, one that history is constantly observing and quietly noting. By reflecting, we can begin to understand how small choices add up over time, how subtle shifts in moral and ethical direction can influence outcomes, and how patterns repeat themselves in ways that are almost comedic if you step back and appreciate the rhythm. It's like watching a long-running TV show where the characters keep making the same mistakes, only this time you're smart enough to see it coming, and you can laugh along with the writer's cleverness. And here's the best part. Reflection isn't just about analyzing others. It's about ourselves, too. By watching the patterns, decisions, and behaviors of leaders, we are prompted to reflect on our own choices, our own responsibilities, and our own actions. It's a gentle reminder that leadership at any scale, from a nation to a neighborhood association, is about more than immediate gain or popularity. It's about understanding consequences, considering long-term impacts, and being aware that every decision, however small, contributes to a larger story. And the humor comes in when we recognize that we too are human, prone to the same subtle contradictions and unexpected twists that leaders often face. Reflection, when embraced fully, also teaches humility. It reminds us that no one has perfect foresight, that mistakes are inevitable, and that learning from experience, both our own and others, is essential. It's like playing a video game where you keep missing the obvious shortcut, and finally, after multiple attempts, you realize the solution was right in front of you the whole time. That aha moment is funny, enlightening, and a little bit humbling, and reflection allows us to enjoy all three simultaneously. And let's not forget the joy of noticing patterns across time. Reflection allows us to see connections that aren't immediately obvious. A decision made decades ago may seem irrelevant at first glance, but when paired with more recent events, a pattern emerges. It's like noticing that every time you wear your lucky socks, something unusual happens, and then realizing there might be more to it than superstition. Patterns in leadership, when reflected upon carefully, reveal a kind of wisdom that is both amusing and profound, reminding us that life has a rhythm, history has a rhythm, and even human folly has a rhythm that can be appreciated if we take the time to notice it. And there's something else that makes reflection so compelling. It fosters perspective. By looking at actions, decisions, and historical echoes through a reflective lens, we learn not to take things at face value. We see the layers, the nuances, and the subtleties that might otherwise escape notice. And when we do this with a sense of humor, it's even better, because it keeps us grounded, prevents us from taking ourselves too seriously, and allows us to enjoy the learning process. After all, leadership, like life, is complex, messy, and occasionally hilarious, and reflection helps us navigate it with clarity and a smile. So, as we consider the reflective dimension of leadership history and decision making, let's embrace the lessons it offers. Let's notice the patterns, appreciate the humor, and learn from the echoes of past events. Let's recognize that every choice matters, that every gesture carries weight, and that understanding these subtleties enriches not only our view of leaders, but our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. Reflection is a tool, a guide, and yes, sometimes a source of amusement that reminds us that wisdom doesn't always have to be dry and solemn. It can be lively, engaging, and even funny if we approach it with the right mindset. And ultimately, reflection teaches us patience, awareness, and the value of considering the broader picture. It encourages us to think, to observe, and to appreciate the intricate web of actions and consequences that form the story of leadership and history. By reflecting with care and humor, we become not just observers, but participants in the ongoing dialogue between past, present, and future, learning from patterns, noticing subtle shifts, and enjoying the occasional cosmic joke along the way. And so, as we embrace the power of reflection and understanding leadership, let us remember to pause, observe, and learn with insight, humor, and a touch of humility, because in doing so, we gain wisdom that illuminates both the present and the path forward. And here's the closing line for impact. If we take the time to reflect thoughtfully with humor and openness, we discover not only insight into leadership, but insight into ourselves, our choices, and the remarkable patterns that shape our world.